So I saw this great show on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse. It's an 8-part series that delves into how megalithic structures point to advanced, highly sophisticated civilizations being present on Earth much earlier than most archaeologists currently believe. The show debuted in November 2022 and became a big hit, making it into the top 10 most watched list for a period of time. The show was so popular that it was approved for a second season, and it's coming out in October of 2024. The author of the show is Graham Hancock, who's kind of like an investigative journalist, and he has a lifelong passion for exploring and uncovering ancient mysteries. So, in the show, Graham visits a bunch of different megalithic sites from around the world that were built by ancient civilizations ranging from places in Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, and the United States. In addition to showing the sites and explaining what makes them unique and much older than most archaeologists currently believe, Graham also shares various myths and legends that were widely passed down by the peoples of those cultures. Well, after being 2 episodes in, I had an epiphany. I realized that the sites he was showing and the stories he was sharing happened to fit incredibly well with the Genesis narrative in the Bible, specifically chapters 1 through 11 of the book of Genesis. In this video, I'm going to revisit some of the key findings presented in the Ancient Apocalypse show, and then explain how and why these ancient megalithic sites and other evidence can be explained in the context of what the Bible says. There are many topics we could discuss to correlate the findings in the show with the Bible. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on 4 things: the global cataclysmic event, the Ice Age, megalithic structures, and myth and legend similarities. So, let's start with the global cataclysmic event. In the show, Graham posits that the effects of an asteroid impact on Earth during the Ice Age led to a rapid melting of the ice caps, spurring a global flood event that reshaped human civilization. The Bible agrees with Graham that there was a massive flood event, and that it occurred thousands of years ago. However, the Bible offers its own explanation as to how the global flood happened, and it had nothing to do with an asteroid. In the book of Genesis, chapter 7, verse 11, it says that all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. This was the initiation of the global flood event, and the Bible says that the floodwaters rose for 40 days and then lasted 150 days before receding. It also states that the floodwaters covered all of the mountains and that all life on land perished. Think about this. It says, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. What do you think that means? To me, 2 things come to mind: deep supervolcanic eruptions and earthquakes, both of which happening in the ocean. Have you heard of the Marianas Trench in the Pacific Ocean? It is the lowest point in the ocean at over 7 miles deep. Ever wonder how this trench or other massive ruptures in the earth underneath the ocean floor were created, and what the forming of those ruptures would have caused? These ruptures would have been created from the movement of tectonic plates, be it from an earthquake or a supervolcano, likely both, would have created massive tsunamis, which would have enveloped vast areas of land with immeasurable volumes of water. Additionally, as tsunamis were washing over the continents, effluent from volcanic eruptions would have filled the atmosphere at global scale, producing climate-altering outcomes, including substantial amounts of rain as the oceans boiled from the eruptions, leading to vast and fast evaporation, sending unprecedented amounts of water into the atmosphere that had to come back down as rain. Scientists concur that such an atmospheric change would cause unprecedented rainstorms and lead to a cold blanket covering the Earth, rapidly cooling the temperature of the planet, which would naturally lead to the formation of large ice caps. With that said, it is more reasonable to believe that the biblical narrative of the global flood event is true, and that this flood event actually led to the Ice Age as we know it today, rather than the other way around, which is what Graham presents in the show. This segues into our second topic, the Ice Age. After the floodwaters receded and the impact of volcanic eruptions caused Earth's ecosystem to rapidly cool, the Ice Age began. More and more scientists now estimate the Ice Age lasted only a few hundred years, rather than thousands or millions of years. Let's think this through a bit more and then draw correlations between the evidence presented in the show and the Bible. Scientists generally agree that sea level during the Ice Age was more than 400 feet lower compared to today's sea level. This lower sea level would have exposed significant additional landmass across the whole Earth, enabling humans and animals to spread to other continents over time. After the floodwaters receded, the Ark's inhabitants, which consisted of humans and animals, disembarked and over time started to spread out, ultimately migrating across the world's continents via land bridges and boats. Contrary to the rapid melting of the ice caps that Graham posits in Ancient Apocalypse, it is far more likely that the ice caps wouldn't have melted that fast. Rather, it would have been gradual. Therefore, if we follow the logical cause and effect of events, it makes the most sense that the Ice Age came after the global flood, not before. Now we're going to talk about megalithic structures. How were these ancient megalithic structures built? How were these massive, heavy stones moved, sometimes from quarries located many miles away? And then, how were the stones cut and shaped so finely that they fit together like puzzle pieces? And why do all these megalithic structures from various places around the world seem to look similar and serve similar purposes? I find the similarities fascinating, and there is no way they are a coincidence. If we look at the Genesis narrative, it is highly likely that some of these megalithic structures, or some parts of these structures, were built in the pre-flood world, which, based on an analysis of the dates provided in the Bible, lasted between 1500 and 2300 years between the creation of Adam and Eve and the time of the global flood. This period of time is frequently referred to as the Antediluvian period. The global flood likely washed away or ruined most man-made structures from the pre-flood era. But after mankind began repopulating the earth post-flood, there is evidence that some of these megalithic sites were rebuilt bigger and better than before. In several episodes of Ancient Apocalypse, multiple archaeologists that Graham interviewed said they discovered that many of these megalithic sites have older cores to them, meaning there are much older structures lying underneath the shell structures that were built on top of them or around them. It is highly likely that some of the structures that archaeologists have uncovered were built to worship various gods, gods that are not the God of the Bible, which is consistent with what Genesis says, in that the peoples of the world turned their backs on the God of the Bible and pursued their own false gods. I also find it fascinating how similar the architectural designs of these structures are. For example, ziggurat structures, which are essentially multi-level step pyramids, were built all around the world, implying that ideas, designs, and construction approaches were carried throughout the planet. This makes sense if one believes in the Genesis narrative, whereby mankind repopulated the earth following the Great Flood and spread throughout the continents. Given there are many hundreds of years in the pre-flood and post-flood eras, mankind had ample time to populate the earth, form various civilizations, and become sophisticated enough to build things like monolithic structures. Lastly, we're going to discuss the myths and legend similarities, of which there are many, and correlate them with what the book of Genesis says. I find it incredibly interesting that there are more than 270 known flood narratives from ancient cultures. Aside from the Bible, other commonly recognized stories include the Epic of Gilgamesh, plus the various stories Graham spoke to in the show. If we look at what the Bible says about the pre-flood and post-flood eras, and how those events shaped mankind, and correlate that with the basic outlines of the various myths and legends from around the world, we see that ancient cultures agreed on several things. Specifically, that there was a cataclysmic flood event, that a remnant of the human race was saved by a boat, and that land animals were saved as well. The only way this correlation makes sense is if Noah's family repopulated the human race after the flood and spread across the earth over hundreds of years. In this situation, the story of the flood would have been passed down through the generations, as is common for cultures to do, especially as it pertains to epic events lived through in history. Think about what happens in the game of telephone. A message is passed from one person to another person, and when the last person in the chain ultimately gets the message, it is very different than the original message. This distortion of the original story is likely what transpired as the various civilizations continued to pass down the story through the generations. We also know that humans are prone to embellish and change accounts for various reasons, which is likely why the myths and legends can have aspects of variation from the core narrative. I also find it interesting that many of these myths and legends also talk about animals being rescued with humans through the flood, and that gods visited the civilizations, many times via the ocean, and taught the people various subjects such as astronomy, agriculture, architecture, and other sophisticated things, and that these beings also taught humans new forms of evil. These beings were worshipped as gods for what they brought to and did for these civilizations. These gods spoken about in these myths and legends also happen to be talked about in the Bible. In chapter 6 of Genesis, there is talk of special beings called sons of God, which are fallen angels that took human form and lived on earth, and the Nephilim, which are hybrid offspring of fallen angels that procreated with human women. It is widely believed that these Nephilim were much larger than average humans, and were often referred to as giants. Goliath was one of these Nephilim, and the Bible says he stood approximately 9 feet 9 inches tall. The inclusion of fallen angels and their giant offspring play well into the themes of the myths and legends that were passed down through the generations, as events that actually did happen, or at least happened in a similar way. Using the Bible and other ancient stories as guides, it is reasonable to assume that these fallen angels and giants helped humans build the sophisticated megalithic structures we see today. It is also implied in these stories that these creatures were also on the earth in the pre-flood era. I know at this point some of you may think the Bible's explanation and my assessment of these things is crazy, or maybe you feel like now you have even more questions. But I assure you, if you search for more information regarding the topics presented in this video, you will find evidence and real scientific discoveries that will cause you to seriously think about these things at a deeper level. For example, did you know that Noah's Ark has been found? Yes, it has been found. Exactly where the Bible says it rested after the flood waters receded, which is in the mountains of Ararat in Turkey, as is specified in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4. There are many great sources that delve deeper into the topics that provide pictures with scientific evidence, analysis, and I encourage you to take a look. Also, there is numerous fact-based scientific research regarding the global flood and the Ice Age and other related topics floating around on the internet and in other venues that back up the claims made on this video, providing further overwhelming evidence that in fact the Genesis narrative in the Bible is the foundation from which the world as we know it exists today. I encourage you to explore further. You may be surprised by what you find. I have linked some videos and resources pertaining to what we talked about today down in the description if you want to check those out. In addition to this, I highly encourage you to read the book of Genesis, At the very least, chapters 1 through 11, which is approximately 20 to 30 pages, depending on the font size of the Bible you are referencing. To conclude, Graham said in one of the episodes that there is a fog that hangs over the evidence he's gathered, clouding the truth from being known. Well, I think the Genesis narrative in the Bible is able to clear that fog and bring clarity to these mysteries. And I hope I was able to demonstrate some of this in this video, as well as inspire you to research these topics further. Thank you for watching. If you got value out of this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Many more videos like this are in the works, so turn on your notifications and check back for more content. Why God Ministries was established with the intention of applying science-based, rational, and logical thought, and the sharing of real-world examples that provide compelling evidence proving that the Bible is true and that the God of the Bible is real. God bless you, and I hope you have a great day.